are going to have a very fun conversation today, but a very informative one, centering around the HBO series Warrior. And we're going to get into history, geopolitics, culture, and so much more. But I'm actually not going to be hosting this conversation today. I'm actually going to turn it over now to Brian Wong. He is the founder of RADII Media, and I am very glad I met him in Shanghai, and I'm very glad to have him on this program. Before we get started, though, please hit that like button. Everyone at RADII Media, everyone here on this channel, hit the like button, share, and subscribe to our channels. And I will turn it now to Brian.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Danny, and good morning from the East. I'm right now in Hong Kong. We have a really great program. We're honored and excited to be working with Danny and everyone else on today's conversation. As Danny said, my name is Brian. I'm founder of RADII. RADII is an independent digital media platform dedicated to sharing captivating stories that transcend boundaries, whether it be between US and China or Asia and the world. And I'm really excited about moderating today's panel, which is going to dive into one of the most talked about television series on air today, Warrior. So for those of you who haven't seen the show, and hopefully most of you have, but if you haven't, hey, still thanks for joining us. This is a show based on Bruce Lee's original writings, and it was a treatment that he wrote that never got produced. It delves into the historical narrative of the Chinese immigrants in America, but what's really amazing is a lot of the content is even relevant to us all today. It's executive produced by Bruce Lee's daughter, Shannon Lee, alongside Justin Lin, who many of you know in his Fast and Furious work and many other great works, and also producer screenwriter Jonathan Trooper. So, as Danny mentioned, Warrior explores the internal struggles of the confines of Chinatown communities back in the 1870s in the US. Challenges posed by Tong warfare. These are the gangs that existed at that time in the Chinatowns, but also sheds light on the broader US, China, and political landscape that was tainted at the time by xenophobia, political corruption, bigotry, and a lot more. In this upcoming conversation, we're going to dive into some of the deep-rooted connections between Chinese and Asian American history in the show. We're going to analyze some of the context, but also look at how the geopolitics of today are conjuring up a lot of similar sentiment now in the US, which I think is quite unfortunate. But I think the good thing is that there are ways to address this, and one of the really critical areas is through culture and arts and music, and that's why we've got Chops and Dana, Showtime, Burton, who are going to talk to us about the work that they did with Warrior. So a lot to unpack, and we're going to just kick things off with the historical context and talking to Carl. Actually, before I just dive into this, we've got Carl Zhao, who is a commentator, historian. Of course, Danny Haifeng, you all know, journalist, political analyst. And then Chops, Scott Jung, Chops, and Dana Showtime Burton. So this is the lineup for today. I want to give proper acknowledgement of all the great sort of speakers that we've got and the panelists. So let's jump into the historical context first with Carl. Carl, Warrior is set.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Danny.
Hey, good. All right. So, Carl, let's just jump into the historical context here.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Warrior is set in the late 1800s of San Francisco Chinatown.
Yeah.
At a time.
Okay. So,
is there a lag for Carl? Maybe there might be.
Sorry, I apologize for my internet connection. I am in the middle of a jungle, and my internet is spotty, and also I spilled water on my laptop yesterday, so I am using my wife's very underpowered laptop. I can see the CPU is chugging at 100% right now, so you might experiencing a little bit choppiness. But let me know if my delivery is being affected by that. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Raise your hand, maybe. Hello? Okay, I saw nodding. Okay, great. All right. So uh, the Chinese are no stranger to America. The first contact between China and America actually happened very early on. In fact, the Spanish colonization of Americas was made sustainable because of export of silver to China. At the time, one of the main enterprises that supported Spanish colonization is the extraction of mineral resources, particularly silver and gold. And China, late Ming Dynasty China, was the world's #1 economy. Its currency was silver, so China needed a lot of silver. So by some accounts, the silver that was mined in the Americas from 1600s to 1800s, in the span of 200 years, 50% of the silver exported from Americas ended up in China. And this was carried out by the so-called Manila galleon trade, where the Spanish they will load up the silvers they looted from the Americas, loaded on the galleon ships from the Mexican port of Acapulco, and the Mexican galleons will sail across Pacific to Manila, another Spanish colony. And the Chinese merchants from southern China will bring all the Chinese goods, tea, silver, porcelain, to Manila and to trade for the Spanish silver. And add to that, there were a lot of Chinese out migration to Southeast Asia, to places like Manila. Manila was at the time very heavily Chinese. So some of these Chinese people got on the Spanish galleon and sailed across the Pacific and ended up in Mexico. At this time, much of the West Coast, present-day West Coast United States, was still part of Mexico. So the Chinese have been reported in Mexico as early as 17th century, 17th, 18th century. And then what happened in 1848 is that United States fought the U.S.-Mexican War, and he annexed much of the American West, including California. And this coincided with a California gold rush in 1848. When the news got out there was gold, people from all over the world rushed in, from Mexico, from Germany, from Europe, from South America, but also from China. Because right now, in 1940, it was a very tumultuous time in China, as many of you already know. The British 1840s, yeah. So the British waged the Opium War on China. Before all the trade China carried out with the outside world was through one port, the port of Guangzhou, or at that time it's called Canton. And I have some connection issues. And when, as a result of the Opium War, the British, the right to sell opium to China, they also demanded China to open additional ports. 5 additional treaty ports were opened. So as a result of the first Opium War, a lot of the trade were shifted north from Canton, from Guangzhou, north to Shanghai. And when Shanghai became the new trade center, the old trade network that directed all the goods to southern China got interrupted, and that caused a lot of economic hardship, disruption, and plus the whole war, Opium War, destabilized the region in the Peril River Delta around Guangzhou when the British troops landed. And so at this time, a lot of the Chinese people were looking to get out. And when the imperial government of China actually had a ban against Chinese citizens from migrating outside. This was resulting from a much earlier time, like a century before. The Qing imperial government was trying to cut off support for the Ming loyalists, so the loyalists to the previous dynasty who had escaped to places like Taiwan, Vietnam. And so they forbid Chinese from going abroad, trying to cut off the support for the Ming loyalists. But that law remained in effect up to 1800s. But after the Opium War, the enforcement of the law became lax. So some Chinese were able to get out. Some Chinese did make their way to the East Coast. And 1948 was a very important year. But then just 2 years after, Just 2 years after the very deadly civil. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just interrupt.
Brian, you want to say something?
Yeah. So
Sure.
I think that's very relevant context to the China side. And what I want to do is kind of bring it to the U.S. and what was happening there. A few things you mentioned was the gold rush. There was also American Manifest Destiny, which, you know, they basically closed the frontier. They reached the West Coast. And then there was the construction of the Trans-Pacific Railway. So all of these things were happening in the time when Warrior, you know, the time frame in which Warrior kind of opens, right? Late 1800s. So you've identified some really key points. I want to kind of just move it to the kind of the next sort of, you know, question, which is really, in light of all that was happening, the Chinese immigrants kind of going to the U.S. because of the unrest in China, the opening up of the West with the gold rush, also jobs for building the railway, and this whole new frontier opening up in the United States. What was the dynamics of the local laborers, many who immigrated from Ireland at the time, and the Chinese immigrants? Tell us what was happening at that time between the labor groups, the business leaders, which some refer to as robin barons, because these guys were making a ton of money off a lot of the business opportunities there, but they were hand in hand with the local politicians. So how was this shaping the climate in California? And, you know, talk to us about some of the policies that were being enacted, the Page Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. These were all relevant to the storyline of Warrior.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, my internet is a little bit choppy, but I think I got most of your questions. I just, if you just allow me a few minutes, I'll try to tie all these threads together. So United States was always interested in having trade relationship with China because as soon as U.S. became independent from the British Empire, U.S. got kicked out of the British Empire trade network. And China at that then in the 1780s was still world's largest economy. So U.S. wanted to seek a replacement for the trade with Britain. So they loaded up their clippers in Boston with American ginseng and fur and sailed to China, to Guangzhou or Canton at the time. And American businessmen play a big role in the Trans-Pacific trade. This is what brought U.S. This is what brought Americans to the West Coast in the first place. Because back then there was no Panama Canal, so they had to sail all across, sail down the South America, up the coast, and they go to Pacific Northwest to trade with fur with the Native Americans and use that fur to go trade with China. This also brought Americans to Hawaii because the Chinese desires the sandalwood that was growing in Hawaii. So Americans, they were Johnny come lately to the great power game in China. The British, French, they were already there. But in 1844, U.S. also sailed their gunboat and signed the Treaty of One Shot with the Qing government, with a stipulation that whatever privilege that was previously granted to French and the British, the U.S. will receive them as well, including treaty port privileges. And as you mentioned, the kind of opening of the frontier in the 1840s, when at the end of the U.S.-Mexican War, and a transcontinental railroad, because to bypass the need to have to run the entire South America to get to the Pacific, and to build that transcontinental railroad, you needed a lot of people because railroad building is very labor intensive. And the U.S. Railroad barons at the time, they decided that we have a huge labor pool right located in China, and they want to have access to that. So this eventually led to the signing of Burlingame Treaty between United States and the Chinese government. So as I mentioned, Chinese government formerly forbidden Chinese people from going abroad. But as a result of the Opium War, the British and the other European powers, they also want to have access to the Chinese labor. So they forced the Qing government to allow, Chinese labor to travel abroad as indentured servants. And then U.S., they were a little less rampacious than the Europeans because at that time, U.S. was really the Johnny come lately, and they didn't have the kind of the muscle as, like the British. So they were nicer to the Chinese, and Chinese prefer to do business with Americans than the British, who they seem as so very arrogant. And the interesting thing about the Burlingame Treaty, it was signed by Burlingame was a U.S. minister to Empire of China, but he made enough friends among the upper echelons of the Qing court that the Qing government entrusted him as their envoy to United States. So Burlingame Treaty was signed by two Americans. It was signed by Burlingame, who was former U.S. ambassador to China, and the U.S. Secretary of State. And the final result of Burlingame Treaty is that U.S. China, they will give each other most okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, for all those who are from the Bay Area in California, there is a town called Burlingame near the airport. That's named after Anson Burlingame, who was the trade minister under President Lincoln, then negotiated these treaties, and then came back to America as once he retired. He then helped represent the Qing dynasty as their trade minister to negotiate these agreements. That's how loved he was by the Chinese Qing government at that time. But there is a direct tie to this individual in California, right outside the San Francisco airport. But what you're saying, Carl, is really, really interesting and very comprehensive. I just want to make sure that we kind of get to the key issues. Then how was that shaping American politics? Because I want to kind of fast forward maybe a few decades after, because even though there was the Burlingame Treaty, that quickly changed when the labor dynamics between the Chinese and the local laborers became very ugly because of jobs, right? So maybe you can talk to us a bit about that. And then also highlight how some of these characters in the show were actually based on real historic characters. Like, Leary is based on Dennis Kearney, this Irish labor leader who actually existed in San Francisco. And Atong was the first Madam of Chinatown in the historic records. And even I think Nellie Davenport, the woman who's saving all the prostitutes from being traded, was the Donaldina Cameron, who was actually a nun who helped save these girls during that era. So maybe you could talk about all of that.
Yes. So two things were happening. United States railroad baron needed Chinese labor, and a lot of the Chinese were fleeing China because of Taiping Rebellion. Taiping Rebellion was a deadliest civil war in the 19th century. Estimatedly 20 million people were killed, and the whole Pearl River Delta region near Guangzhou or Canton was devastated. A lot of people are looking to get out, and the Burlingame Treaty, which was considered one of the more equal treaty between China and a Western power, stipulated that Chinese people will be free to leave China to go to United States, and then and this is really give you. But at the time, U.S. saw that as a good beneficial treaty because it allowed the U.S. business interests to penetrate the Chinese market and bring the cheap Chinese labor to come to U.S. to build a railroad. Because one of the driver behind the Burlingame Treaty clause is to get access to that Chinese labor to California to build the western section of the transcontinental railroad. But once, when the transcontinental railroad finally connected, on the eastern side, on the western side, it was mostly built by the Chinese labor. When the railroad connected, when they make the picture, they got all the Chinese people out of the picture and just had the Irish people on film. And this would play out when now the railroad enabled all the white European immigrants to come to California. They realized, wow, there's a lot of Chinese here. And there's a lot of Chinese who have been brought over to work on the railroad. There has been a lot of Chinese who are working in the mining industry, you know, part of the gold rush. And they see Chinese as alien competitors for jobs. And this happened in around the late 19th century, around 1870s, 1880s. The economy, you know, U.S. had its economic depression. This was not the Great Depression, but this was you know, the earlier predecessors. The economy were very bad, and all these white immigrant labor that came to California suddenly find you know, the prospect for jobs are not as great as they thought, and they blame the Chinese. And this is where the people like Dennis Kearney came from. Dennis Kearney himself is an Irishman, immigrant to San Francisco, and he's actually not a laborer. He is a businessman, but he very quickly, through his gift of gab, you know, because he can really stir up a crowd, he founded the Working Men's Party, and he will end his every speech with "Chinese must go," you know, and then you know, because he was. This is a problem with the U.S. from the very beginning. It's really hard to build class solidarity because of the racial divide. And there's also the punching down aspect of the U.S. politics. You know, these Irish immigrants, even though themselves were kind of put on the bottom rung of the hierarchy, but there's always someone even lower than them that can punch down, and that's the Chinese immigrants. And this is when this will bring about eventually the Chinese Exclusion Act. And one of the feature about Chinese coming to America is it's mostly young men, mostly male, because, you know, it's this tradition, the women usually stay behind to take care of the family. And the young men, and most of the Chinese immigrants, unlike many European immigrants, they came to America not to settle. They came to America to make some money so they can send money back home to support their family. And eventually they will go back too. But through the layers of exploitation, because a lot of the time, even though they're not strictly indentured servitude, but the way they come to America is by the so-called credit ticket system. You know, their passage to America was given to them on credit, and they have to pay that back through the wages they gain working on the railroad. And many of them are already in debt by the time they landed in the United States. And because of a layer of middleman exploitation, many of them don't make enough money to send money back home. And so that actually prolongs their stay in US. And there was a very shortage of women in this Chinese community because, as I say, traditionally Chinese women don't travel abroad. And only the wealthiest Chinese merchant, they will bring like maybe a second wife or concubine because their main wife will still be back home supporting the family. And then this led to a proliferation of the prostitution trade. And this is where the Madame Atoy came from. Madame Atoy was a real Chinese woman in San Francisco. She came to United States with her husband, but her husband died in the passage on the ship, and she became the mistress of the captain. And the captain gave her so much money, so by the time she landed on California, she was already wealthy. And then she spotted a business opportunity when she saw like there was a dearth of women and all the men were looking at her, sizing her up. So she started the first peep show in the West Coast, and she would charge all these gold miners 1 ounce of gold to see her peep show. And so she became like this like a brothel runner, and she was, you know, as you say, she was one of the character on the show. This was a real historical person. And also the Dennis Kearney is also a real historical person, a very anti-Chinese labor leader, even though he himself is not a proletariat. He was just a populist, you know, like many of us today could relate to. He railed against the big business and robber barons, even though himself was a business owner, but he was leveraging all the discontent of the working class, except he directed against the immigrant, particular Chinese immigrant, because by 1880s, Chinese were, there were 300 Chinese in South California. It consisted of about 1/10 of California population. I'm sorry, you want to have another question? Sorry.
No,
did you have
no,
question?
Carl, I was going to say you've got encyclopedic knowledge of this information. I'm very impressed. And I think you've given a really good overview of what the context was historically in the time frame that sort of Warrior kicks off. And you've identified the dynamics in China, the dynamics of the laborers, both the local European ones and the new arrivals from China, and then the political dynamics that were taking place that were really shaping, the countries and how they were interacting. Initially, thanks to Anson Burlingame, a very positive, constructive sort of engagement, which I think historically is amazing, and I wish more people knew about this character, because that was quite unique in the history. But then how that quickly shifted by 1882 to one of the most discriminatory policies targeting a specific group in U.S. history by 1882. The Page Act was also focused on actually stopping women from Asia and from China specifically to moving to America for fear that these laborers would get settled into America. There was also this talk about the conflict of values, something that we're hearing a lot today, which, if you don't mind, Carl, I'm going to move to Danny now and kind of talk about how today's U.S.-China tension is actually conjuring up some of the similar sentiment of what we heard about 100 years ago. Shannon Lee, the daughter of Bruce Lee, who's the executive producer of The Warrior, said that not that much has changed. Yes, we have better technology and faster cars, but how we treat one another, not much has changed. We are mirroring the current climate and the times with a show that took place 100 years ago. Okay, so that's what she said, and I thought it was quite astute. But I wondered, do you guys agree with that? Yes or no? And what can we do? Some final thoughts in terms of moving forward on how to address this, whether it be through arts, culture, or anything else that we do in our everyday lives. I'm going to go through each of you, from Carl to Danny, and then finish up with Dana and Chops. Hopefully you get some final thoughts, because this has been a fantastic conversation. And I just kind of want to hear what you guys have to say on this quote.
So I absolutely agree with what Shannon Lee said. There's eerie parallels between what happened in the late 19th century and today. Back then, United States, a lot of the robber baron tycoons saw China as a place of a market and abundant source of labor. And then yet at the moment when the U.S. economy turned south, when U.S. was experiencing a series of depressions in late 19th century, then all this Chinese suddenly became the scapegoat for all the social ills in the United States. We see parallels, as you guys already mentioned, COVID. Back in the 1870s, 1880s, the Chinese were seen as a vector of spreading disease. American medical associations claiming that Chinese are bringing disease that themselves somehow have immunity to, but will endanger the white people's health. And this is why the Page Act was enacted, because they see the Chinese women who work in the sex industry as a possible vector to infect the white men who patronize these Chinese brothels that will bring the Chinese disease to the white community. And this is one of the reasons they were given to ban the Chinese women from coming to America. Of course, the other reason is they don't want Chinese to settle down and have children. And another thing I need to mention is that because this was a result of the 14th Amendment, because right after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment was enacted to grant rights of anyone who was born in the United States, who was naturalized as U.S. citizens, are U.S. citizens. So suddenly they weren't prepared for these these Chinese coming over, the possibility that they might have family and have children who will grow up as American citizens. And this led to a lot of the anti-Chinese violence, which we are also seeing today. One of the crucial early act the people versus Hall, when the people of the state of California versus George Hall, when a George Hall who was accused of killing a Chinese minor, and he was initially convicted on the but the 3 trial witnesses were also Chinese people. So George Hall challenged the ruling because at the time the racist law says Black American and Native American cannot bear witness against white man. George Hall argued that this law should extend to the Chinese, and the California Supreme Court agreed with them, and this basically made it very permissible to attack the physical person of the Chinese immigrants in the United States. I mean, that still goes on today, and all the blaming on China, whether for and Chinese, whether for spreading disease or whether for spreading social ills, that goes on today. And as for how to counteract that, I think the best hope is offered by people like Dana and Chops, through people-to-people exchange, through share of common culture, and by us here talking about it. We need to raise our voice and challenge the whatever mainstream narrative that there is.
Thank you so much, Carl. Great insights. Again, man, you got all the historic information in your head there. Walking encyclopedia. Really appreciate you giving us context. And there's so much of this history we're not aware of. And to be honest, like, even if you're not Chinese or Asian American, this context is important because, the plight of the Chinese 100 years ago became the plight of the Mexicans that came as laborers. And, there's a lot of collaboration that happened during the civil rights time between Asians and Blacks. Actually, Hiram Fong, a lot of people don't know who he was, but the first and only Chinese American senator, worked very closely with the human rights activists to push for a lot of the change at that time. So we all need to be aware of these things. We all need to work together. And this is for the betterment of not just America and China, but the world as a whole.
And we're going to do a song for RADII. We're going to do a song for the Silk and Steel podcast. We're going to do a song for my man Danny. We're going to get all of our brothers and sisters from across the globe connected with you guys to promote you and your causes. And I want to leave with a little poem I wrote, a little rap that kind of encapsulates the spirit of warrior and tells the story actually from a first-person perspective. From the perspective of a Chinese person that's going through this. And it goes like this. I say, searching for gold mountains. We came over by the thousands. Chinatown was public housing. The mission and bitches of riches flowing like a fountain. Fleeing the indignity of indemnities. Celestial beings in the midst of war and peace. Strangers from a different shore, we crossed the Pacific to escape the British opium wars. Now open freedom's doors. Open freedom's doors. We sought refuge amongst the tongs, lion dances and firecrackers. Games of chances kept us strong, ready to box with our arms. Boxing with Bolo in the dojo, Chino with Loco, prize fighting for the promo. My advice was to breathe slow, capture the flow, because you will never know when it's your time to go, searching for mountains of gold. Love and light, showtime from the Iron Mike. Thank you guys for putting this together.
Right. Fire. Thanks, Dana. That was awesome. What a great way to finish. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Danny, for co-hosting. This is a really, really fantastic session. You guys know where to find Danny, obviously, that are watching the stream here. Carl Jha has his own podcast. I'm sure most of you know it, Silk and Steel. Dana Showtime Burton, his handle will be put in the caption, so you guys can find him. In Chops, I saw somebody put in his link to his music site, but we'll make sure to put that in the caption. In RADII, you guys can find us on radii.co, and also our social media handles we'll add. So this has been fantastic. I really do hope there's a season 4 to Warrior, but let's finish up season 3. The last episode, I think, is this week. And it is crazy, man. That show, it just it's you can't get enough. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Danny, we good?
Yeah, we're good. Just thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're dropping all the likes and oh, Carl is saying something. So Carl, go ahead. No.
I
Okay.
was just gonna say, Brian, we should do a show. We should do a show just on the historical background of the warrior, because there's so much. Like I just barely scratching the surface on my talk here, because there's so much material there. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, everyone who's watching, make sure that you're liking the stream, sharing it, leaving a comment before you go on both of the channels, and we'll end here. Good night, good morning, wherever you are. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much.